This is an Evans Ornamental Turning Lathe. It was built in 1875 by a firm named Evans, and it's a beautiful, beautiful machine. This treadle typically is the only way you could have powered this machine in 1875. With a little bit of effort, the smoothness of this treadle will really make that part run fairly quickly. But I suspect I'm not going over much more than 1100 RPMs. So it is a very smooth, quiet running machine, one of the finest ornamental turning lathes money could buy, typically in the 1800s. The one problem with this machine though, back then when it was being made, it was very expensive, equal to the cost of at least 2 homes in England. So with the cost being so high, very few people had them. Because very few people had them, they're hard to find. Because they're hard to find, they cost $15,000 and $25,000 if you could find one. So they're a little difficult to use compared to the Rose engine, but they're a beautiful, beautiful machine. And you can see how smooth the spindle runs. And after you've turned a project on it with the spindle, what you typically would do is pull the belt off and put this belt on. This belt goes to an overhead drive, so when you treadle, your linear action would go over to this pulley, and this pulley would drive these 2 pulleys that would come down to the cutter. And this is how it works today. I've got a small motor up there that's variable that stops me from treadling when I want to make these outfeed cuts. What I'm driving right here is an eccentric cutting frame. And the eccentric cutting frame is preset to do a beautiful barleycorn pattern, but I have to index my project every time I've made a cut. Now I have a predetermined stop right here, and what you do is you would drive this cutter into the workforce, pull it back, index, make another cut, and do that throughout the whole project. Every time you want to change a different part of the cut, you have to rechange the tooling and rechange the cutters. Now we're going to take a look at some of these beautiful cutters. This is a beautiful mahogany box with a small inlay of brass in the front. There's 480 cutters in this box with profiles of every conceivable shape one would anytime need to put on the interior or the exterior of a lidded vessel or a spindle or anything else you'd want to turn on your wood lathe. There's all these larger type cutters up here with all these beautiful profiles, and every single cutter is marked with a number. Now this ornamental turning lathe also has different size cutters down below. There's at least 100 cutters in this box. Very, very small profiles that can fit in all these different types of cutting frames that come with the machine. And in the bottom drawer are drill bits with forms on them, and they each can do hundreds of different type forms. Some of them are typically off-center, so you can do small pearls and small, very, very fine detail on your ornamental turning work. This is a small tapered shank, and there's probably over 100 of them in that bottom drawer, and they're all also marked with a number. So when you have to reference a specific cutter with a certain shape, you can go right back to it. The different cutting frames that fit inside this toolbox right here. It's a horizontal cutting frame with a modern design. A drilling frame for drilling small diameter holes with a tapered spade drill. a fixed cutter of modern design. The different attachments one would also get with this machine would be a series of brass cup chucks. A lot of different parts in the old days were fitted to these cup chucks, and they were driven by cup trucks. Nothing modern like this 4-jaw chuck that I have on here right now. Another chuck that was really sought after in the days of old is an oval chuck with a phasing attachment on the front. This oval chuck is really nice. It's a little difficult to set up, but once you get used to it, it's a beautiful chuck to own. You are off center, so you could not travel and move very quickly with this much weight off center. This chuck typically weighs at least 4 to 6 pounds. Another thing that they did with this machine a lot is turn threads. There's several ways to turn threads on this machine, but hand chasing threads was something that they did quite often up to at least the 1930s. The last piece that I got with this machine is a small gauge that you can put at the end of the pulley to check your RPMs. There's a mathematical equation that goes along with this dial. When this dial starts to spin, you check the number and multiply it by your equation, and gives you the amount of RPMs that you're treadling. Well, that's about all for the ornamental turning lathe. You can see that there's a big difference between an ornamental turning lathe and a Rose engine. It's much more complicated, a little harder to set up, and they're much more difficult to find in the United States. Thanks for coming by. We'll see you again.